On the night of my grandmother's funeral reception, my mother looked at me across the crowded living room and said, loud enough for her book club friends to hear, "Serena handles logistics. That's really all she's good for." I had just finished arranging 47 chairs, coordinating the catering, and ironing the tablecloths at 6 in the morning because my mother didn't trust anyone else to do it correctly. She just didn't want to admit I was the one doing it. I smiled. I didn't say anything. I had a folder in my bag that was about to make everything she'd ever said to me obsolete. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what the previous 31 years look like before you can understand why I smiled instead of cried. My name is Serena Wells. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I believed what my family told me. That I was the dependable one, the practical one, the one who would always be there to hold things together. I didn't realize until very recently that those words weren't compliments. They were a cage. My mother's name is Paulette. My father is Gerald, my younger sister is Tatum, and she has always been, in my parents' words, the one with potential. Tatum is a landscape architect. She designs luxury gardens for estates in Connecticut and Massachusetts. She's won regional awards. She went to a school my parents paid for in full, while I took out loans to attend a state university 2 hours from home because my father said, and I remember this exactly, "We need to be smart about where we invest our energy, Serena." I was 17 years old when he said that. What they meant was they needed to be smart about where they invested their money. Tatum got the investment. I got the loans. This is not a story about jealousy. I want to be clear about that. I love my sister. I have always loved my sister. She didn't ask to be the favorite. She didn't know, for most of our lives, what was happening in the spaces between us. This is a story about a grandmother who saw everything, said nothing for 30 years, and then left me the truth in a safety deposit box in Hartford. My grandmother on my mother's side. Everyone called her Mimi, though her real name was Constance. Died 11 months ago at 84. She was sharp until the end, sharper than anyone gave her credit for, and she had a particular way of watching a room that I recognized in myself only after she was gone. She didn't miss things, she cataloged them. At her funeral, I was the one who organized the flowers, coordinated the wake, managed the caterers, drove the out-of-town relatives to and from the hotel, and made sure my mother's grief looked beautiful and attended to from every angle. My aunt flew in from Phoenix and spent the reception telling everyone what a treasure Tatum was. My uncle from Raleigh asked me twice to refill the coffee. Nobody asked to arrange the lilies. They were Mimi's favorite. I had driven 40 minutes to find the right variety because the florist near my parents' house had a cheaper version that wouldn't have been right. Nobody asked, and I didn't tell them. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was the phone call I received 3 weeks later from a man named Douglas Hartwell, who introduced himself as my grandmother's private attorney and said he had a bequest that could only be delivered to me in person. I assumed it was the sewing box. Mimi had a beautiful old sewing box that I'd admired since I was a child, rosewood with brass fittings, and she'd mentioned once that she wanted me to have it. A sewing box and maybe some recipe cards. I drove to Hartford on a Wednesday morning thinking about the sewing box. It was not the sewing box. Douglas Hartwell's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, small and tidy, the kind of office that belongs to a man who has been keeping important secrets for a very long time. He had kind eyes and a careful handshake, and he placed a thick manila envelope on the desk between us before he sat down. "Your grandmother," he said, "asked me to hold this for 2 years after her death. She changed the instructions 8 months before she passed. She said you'd be ready sooner." I asked him what was inside. He said he hadn't read it. He said that was the point. He also placed a single sheet of paper beside the envelope. It was a bank statement for an account I'd never heard of. My name was on it. The balance was $62,000. I looked at him. He looked at me. I picked up the envelope, Mimi's handwriting on the front. My name, in her careful cursive. Below it 2 words, for later. I drove home with the envelope on my passenger seat and didn't open it for 9 days. This is the part people don't understand when I tell the story. They always ask why I waited. Why not rip it open in the parking lot or on the highway or the moment you got home? I don't know how to explain it except to say that I could feel the weight of it. Not physically. It wasn't heavy. But I'd spent 31 years being told I wasn't the one with potential, wasn't the one worth investing in, wasn't the one who would amount to anything remarkable. There was a part of me that was afraid the envelope would confirm it, that Mimi, the one person who had always made me feel seen, had actually left me a note explaining why. I know that doesn't make rational sense. I know that. But grief does strange things to logic, and so does a lifetime of being told you're the logistics person. I opened it on a Sunday night sitting on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, because the couch felt too comfortable for whatever was about to happen. Mimi had written 11 pages by hand. Clipped to the front were 2 documents I didn't understand at first, a notarized letter from a law firm in Providence, and a folded printout that I set aside to read second. I started with her letter. "My darling girl," she wrote. "I have been trying to write this letter for 22 years. Every time I started, I found a reason to stop. Fear, mostly. Your mother has never been someone who receives honesty gracefully, and I was afraid of what she would do to you if I told you what I knew while she still had influence over your life. I convinced myself I was protecting you. I am not sure that was true. I think I was protecting myself. I'm going to tell you the truth now, all of it. And then I'm going to ask you to decide what to do with it." The truth was this. When my mother was 25, she had an affair. This was before she married my father, Gerald, but not long before, about 4 months. The man's name was Colton. He was a junior partner at the architecture firm where my mother worked as an office manager. He was, by Mimi's account, everything Gerald was not. Creative, impulsive, inconsistent, the kind of man you fall for when you are young and confuse intensity for love. My mother got pregnant. She didn't know, at first, whose baby it was. The timing was close enough that it could have been Gerald's. She chose to believe it was Gerald's, because that was easier, and because Colton had already transferred to the firm's Portland office by the time she found out, and because Gerald was the safer choice, and she had made her decision. I was born 8 months after their wedding. Tatum was born 3 years later, after things had settled, after my mother had, in her own way, committed to the version of events she'd chosen. Tatum was Gerald's daughter without question. I was the question my mother had decided not to ask. The notarized letter from Providence was from a DNA lab. Mimi had arranged a test 4 years before she died, using a sample she'd collected from Gerald without his knowledge. She didn't tell me how. The results were unambiguous. Gerald Wells was not my biological father. The folded printout was a page from an architecture firm's website. Colton Asher, principal and founder, Asher Design Group, Providence, Rhode Island. Beneath his professional headshot was a brief bio. He had started his own firm 18 years ago. He had 2 adult children from a first marriage that had ended in divorce. He was currently single. He was, according to his firm's website, 61 years old. He had my nose. That was the first thing I noticed, and I know how strange that sounds. But there it is. Mimi's letter continued for 7 more pages. She wrote about what she had seen over the years. The way my mother treated me differently from Tatum without ever being able to justify it. The subtle and not so subtle ways my parents had directed resources and attention and praise away from me and toward my sister. She wrote about the college funding decision and the way my mother had once said, at a family dinner when I was 19, that Serena will be fine, she's practical. As if practicality was something that happened to people who didn't deserve better. She wrote, "I believe your mother has been punishing you for 31 years for something you had no part in. You were an infant. You were innocent. And I watched her do it, and I said nothing, and that is the thing I am most ashamed of in my life." She wrote, "The money in the account is for me, saved over many years in small amounts, so your mother wouldn't know. It's yours. Use it for whatever the dream is that you've been keeping to yourself. I know you have one. I've watched you keep it close for a decade." She was right. I did have one. Here is what my family knew about my professional life. I worked in project management at a mid-sized construction company in Hartford. I coordinated timelines, managed contractor relationships, handled budgets, practical, reliable. Exactly what they expected. Here is what my family did not know. For 6 years, I had been spending my evenings and weekends running a structural consulting practice under my own name. I had started it quietly after noticing that small architectural firms often couldn't afford full-time structural engineers and were desperate for someone who could bridge the gap. I had built it project by project, client by client, through word of mouth and one regional industry conference where someone with a bigger network than mine happened to shake my hand. By the time Mimi died, I had 19 active clients. I had been featured in 2 trade publications under my own name. I had turned down a full-time offer from a firm in Boston because I wasn't ready to give up what I'd built, and because the day job still provided health insurance and I was being sensible about the transition. I had never told my family. Not because I was ashamed. I wasn't, not even slightly. But because I knew what would happen. My mother would find a way to diminish it. My father would suggest I be careful not to overextend. Tatum would be congratulated for inspiring me, because apparently everything I did was a reflection of her influence in some way. I had learned, over many years, that my achievements were safest when they were invisible. Mimi knew. I had told Mimi 3 years before she died, over tea in her kitchen, because I trusted her, and I needed someone to know. She had put her cup down very slowly and looked at me for a long moment and said, "I always knew you were building something they couldn't see." She never told anyone. She kept my secret like she kept all important things. Quietly, carefully, and with intention. I sat on the floor of my apartment with her letter in my hands for a long time after I finished reading it. The grief came first. Not for the secret, but for the 31 years of believing, somewhere underneath everything, that maybe they were right. Maybe I was just the practical one. Maybe logistics was the ceiling. It's a particular kind of grief, realizing that the lie you've been told was never actually about you, that it was always about someone else's fear. It doesn't hurt less for having an explanation. It just hurts differently. Then something else came. Clarity, maybe. The kind that burns clean. My mother's 60th birthday party was in 6 weeks. She had already given me the task list. Venue coordination, catering, invitations, the slideshow, the floral arrangements, the hotel block for out-of-town guests. Tatum had been assigned one thing, a toast. I looked at the DNA results on my floor. I looked at Colton Asher's photo on my phone. I thought about what Mimi had written. Use the truth however you need to. I wasn't going to blow up my mother's birthday party. That's not who I am. But I was done being the logistics person who stayed invisible. I called Colton Asher's firm the next morning. His assistant answered. I gave my name and said I was the daughter of Paulette Wells, née Fontaine, who had worked at Marchetti Architecture in Hartford in the early 90s. I said I had a personal matter I needed to discuss with him and asked if he would be willing to speak with me. There was a pause. Then the assistant said she would pass the message along. He called me back within 2 hours. His voice was careful at first, the voice of a man who has thought, occasionally, that a call like this might come one day and has never quite decided how he would handle it. I didn't make him navigate it alone. I told him I had done a DNA test. I told him about Mimi's letter. I told him the results. There was a silence that lasted long enough that I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he said, I wondered. I always wondered. I heard she had a baby and I did the math and I told myself I was wrong. We talked for 2 hours. Then we talked again the next evening. And the evening after that. He was, it turned out, a person who asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, which was more than I could say for the men I'd been calling family my entire life. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't available in the way that mattered 31 years ago, and we both knew that the distance between us was partly structural and partly choice, and we would have to figure out how much of it was repairable. But he was there. He was present. He drove from Providence to Hartford to meet me for coffee 3 weeks after our first phone call, and he brought a photograph of his mother, my grandmother, a woman I would never get to meet, And he said quietly, before we sat down, "You look like her around the eyes." That was the moment I cried. Not at the DNA results, not at Mimi's letter, not at any of the big revelations. At a photograph of a woman I'd never known who apparently passed her eyes down through someone I'd just met. Grief is strange. You cry at the specific things. We were 6 days from my mother's birthday party when I had dinner with Colton for the second time. I had already done all of the party coordination. The venue was confirmed. The catering was arranged. The slideshow was built. I had spent 3 Sundays on it, sourcing photos from relatives, organizing 60 years of my mother's life into something warm and celebratory. In 43 of the 60 photos, Tatum was prominently featured. I appeared in 9. 3 of those 9, I was partially cut off. I had counted. I knew it wasn't an accident. At dinner, Colton asked what I was going to do. I told him I didn't know yet, which was true. I was still deciding whether to say anything at all, whether the party was the right place, whether any place was the right place, or whether the right move was to walk away quietly and let my parents live with their choices and simply stop allowing their version of me to have any authority over how I lived. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." He said, "I've been a coward about this for 30 years, and I'm trying to be better, but this is your story to tell on your timeline." I appreciated that more than I told him. The night before the party, I was at my parents' house until midnight finishing setup. My mother had 3 requests she'd added that afternoon: a different centerpiece arrangement, a change to the seating chart that required reprinting 8 place cards, and a decision that the cocktail station needed to move 12 feet to the left because of the lighting. Tatum arrived at 8, helped herself to wine, and spent an hour telling our mother about a new client project. They sat in the living room while I moved furniture. Nobody offered to help. Nobody asked if I needed anything. At 10 o'clock, my father said from the couch that I was indispensable. I remember his exact tone: fond, comfortable. The tone of a man complimenting a piece of equipment that had never let him down. I went home at midnight and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a while before going inside. I was not going to cry. I was done crying in cars. The party started at 2 the next afternoon. By 3, 60 guests were there, and my mother was radiant in a blue dress, receiving exactly the kind of celebration she had always wanted. The venue looked beautiful. The food was excellent. The flowers were right. I watched people compliment my mother on her exquisite taste and her impeccable organization, and I watched my mother accept the compliments with the gracious modesty of someone who had genuinely done the work. She hadn't, but I had spent long enough in this role to understand that it came with a policy of credit transfer, and I had made my peace with it. Or I thought I had. What I hadn't made peace with was the slideshow. I had built 2 versions. The first was the one my mother had asked for: warm, celebratory, a curated portrait of 60 years. It was beautiful. It would have made everyone in that room feel exactly what she wanted them to feel. The second was the one I built for myself. The night after I read Mimi's letter, at 2 in the morning with a glass of wine and an honesty I hadn't known I was capable of. I hadn't planned to use it. I'd built it to process something, the way you write a letter you never send. But then I thought about the 9 photos, the partial frames, the 43 pictures of Tatum, and I thought about what Mimi wrote: use the truth however you need to. The second slideshow was not cruel. I want to be clear about that. It did not expose anyone or embarrass anyone publicly. It was simply honest. It included photos my mother had never displayed, photos from Mimi's collection that Mimi had given me years ago because she said I should have them. Photos of me at 7, building a model bridge out of popsicle sticks at the kitchen table. At 12, winning a regional math competition nobody in my family had attended. At 16, at the school science fair, holding a certificate my parents hadn't framed. At 22, at my college graduation, standing with Mimi because my parents had been late and missed the processional. And at the end, one slide that wasn't a photo. It was a paragraph. Black text on white background. It said, "Serena Wells, project manager by day, structural engineering consultant by night, has spent the last 6 years building a practice that now serves 19 clients across 3 states. She did this quietly, without assistance, without acknowledgement, and without anyone in this room knowing it was happening. She has been nominated for a regional industry award. She did not tell her family because she was not sure they would be proud. She is telling them now. Happy birthday, Mom. I have always loved you more than you made room for. I stood at the laptop in the corner of the venue, and I thought about it for a long time. 60 people in the room. My mother at the center of them. Tatum nearby, looking beautiful and comfortable in the way she always did at family events. Colton was not there. I hadn't invited him. That wasn't what this was. This was mine. I hit play on the first slideshow. It ran beautifully. People smiled and laughed at the right moments and misted up at the photos of my mother as a young woman. Tatum's toast was warm and funny and well received. My mother cried, the good kind, and hugged Tatum for a long time and told her she was everything. I watched from the side of the room. I had not been asked to give a toast. And then Tatum, in a gesture I genuinely believe was spontaneous and not calculated, said into the microphone, and of course, none of this would have been possible without Serena, who organized absolutely everything and probably ironed the tablecloths at 6 this morning. Everyone laughed. My mother smiled in my direction. A smile that said, "Yes, exactly, good girl. That's your role." And I thought, now. I walked to the laptop. I told the AV coordinator I needed to run one more slide. He stepped aside. I opened the second file. I hit play. The room shifted when the photos of me started appearing. Not dramatically. Just a kind of quiet rearrangement of attention. People looked at the screen longer. The photo of me at 12 with the math competition certificate. The graduation photo with Mimi. A few people leaned toward each other and said something I couldn't hear. When the final slide came up, the paragraph, the room went very still. I watched my mother read it. I had thought she would be angry. I had prepared for anger. Instead, what crossed her face was something I had never seen there before. Recognition. Like someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and is not sure whether to be relieved or terrified that someone else has noticed the weight. My father read it and looked at the floor. Tatum read it and looked at me, and I could not read her expression at all. Then my mother's oldest friend, a woman named Barbara who has known our family for 35 years, started clapping. Quietly at first. Then a few other people joined. And then it became applause, the genuine kind, not the nervous politeness kind, and I stood at the back of the room and did not cry. My mother crossed the room toward me. I held very still. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were bright. I didn't know from what. She said quietly, so only I could hear, "When did you start the consulting practice?" 6 years ago, I said. She said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "I think you know why." There was a long silence. Around us, conversations had resumed, the applause had faded, the room had found a new equilibrium. But we were in a pocket of stillness, the two of us, and I could feel 31 years of unsaid things pressing against the walls of it. She said, "Your grandmother's letter." I said, "Yes." Her face did something complicated. I had expected denial. I had expected her to say it wasn't true, that the DNA results were wrong, that Mimi had been confused in her final years. Instead, she said, so quietly I almost missed it, "I was 25. I was scared. I thought if I didn't think about it, it would stop being true." I said, "It was always true. And I always paid for it." She didn't answer that. I don't know if she had an answer. We stood there together in the noise of her birthday party, and I let the silence exist without filling it, which is something I have spent 31 years not allowing myself to do. Later, after the guests had gone and the caterers were cleaning up, I found my father in the kitchen, standing with a glass of water, looking at nothing in particular. He had aged significantly in the previous 2 hours, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. He said, "I always suspected." I said, "I know." He said, "I told myself it didn't matter." I said, "It mattered to me. It mattered every time you told me the practical child didn't need what the talented child needed. Every time college funding came up. Every time I asked for something and you found a reason why Tatum needed it more. He said, I didn't do that intentionally. I said, I know you believe that. That's all I said. Not because I had forgiven him. I hadn't. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But because I had run out of things that needed to be said out loud. The rest of it was mine to carry or put down on my own timeline. And it didn't need an audience. Tatum found me in the parking lot when I was loading things into my car. She said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. She said, about any of it. The consulting, She stopped. Mom told me just now. About what Grandma Mimi left you. I waited. She said, I'm sorry. I mean that. I don't know what to do with it, but I am genuinely sorry. I believed her. Tatum is not a villain. She was never the villain. She was handed advantages she didn't ask for by parents who were managing their own guilt in the most cowardly way available. And she built a life with those advantages because that's what people do. You work with what you're given. I know that better than most. I said, I'm not angry at you. She said, that might be worse. We stood in the parking lot for a while. It was getting dark and cold, and neither of us moved to leave. She said, 19 clients. The award nomination. You did all of that by yourself. I said, Mimi knew. She laughed, a wet surprise laugh. Of course she did. I got a call 2 weeks later from the regional industry organization. The award was for emerging structural consulting practices with a focus on sustainable design. I had applied 8 months ago before Mimi died, before the envelope, before any of this. I had applied because my work was good, and I had earned the right to be considered, and I hadn't told anyone because I wasn't ready to explain what winning would mean to me in the context of a family that had spent 30 years suggesting I aim for something achievable. I won. The ceremony was in February. Colton came. He sat in the third row, and he did not make a scene, and he did not introduce himself to anyone as my father because that was not what the evening was about. But he was there, and when I walked up to receive the award and said my name into the microphone, Serena Wells Structural Consulting, he was the person I looked at. My mother called the morning after. She asked how the ceremony went. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been before, feeling its way around a new shape of our relationship. I told her it went well. I told her I'd won. There was a silence, and then she said, I am proud of you. I didn't say anything for a moment. I said, I know it doesn't fix anything. She said, no, I know it doesn't. I said, but thank you. We are not repaired. I want to be honest about that. We are not the mother and daughter who laugh on the phone for an hour, who share instinctive ease, who have 31 years of warmth to draw on. We are two people who are beginning, very slowly, to learn each other in the absence of a lie that was never my lie to carry. Colton and I talk every Sunday. He came to Hartford last month to see the office I'm renting now. A real office, not my kitchen table, with my name on the door and the Wells Structural Consulting logo on frosted glass. He walked through the space without saying anything for a while, and then he stood at the window and said, quietly, that he was sorry he hadn't been there for any of it. I told him he was there now. Some things, it turns out, you can start from the middle. Mimi's sewing box arrived separately, 3 months after the envelope, with a note from Douglas Hartwell saying she had arranged for it to be stored until after everything else had settled. She had written a small card and tucked it inside, for mending and making. You've always known the difference. I put it on my desk at the new office. The rosewood and brass fittings catch the light in the afternoon, and sometimes when I'm between calls I run my fingers over the lid and think about what it means to be seen by exactly one person when everyone else is looking through you. It's enough. It was always enough. And Mimi, wherever she is, I hope she knows I used everything she left me. The truth, the money, the permission to take up space. I'm taking it. I plan to keep taking it for the rest of my life. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to be the dependable one. Not in the way people mean it as a compliment. Dependable, reliable, always there. But what it costs in the currency nobody talks about. The years you don't ask for things because you've been quietly taught that asking is for someone else. The dreams you protect by keeping them invisible, not because you're ashamed of them, but because you've learned that the people who are supposed to celebrate you will find a way to make your victories feel small. That cost is real, and it compounds, and for a long time I thought it was just the price of belonging to the family I had. What Mimi gave me wasn't just the truth about my father, or the $62,000, or the permission slip I hadn't known I was waiting for. She gave me the thing that's actually hardest to hold on to when the people around you keep letting go of it on your behalf, the understanding that what happened to me was a choice someone else made, not a verdict on who I was. My mother made a choice at 25. She was scared and young, and she took the path that felt safest, and then she spent 31 years managing the guilt of that choice by directing it outward. I don't say that to excuse her. There is no excusing 31 years of treating your child as less than because looking at her fully was too uncomfortable. But I say it because understanding the why of something is different from accepting it, and I spent too long confusing the two. I accepted their version of me as permanent truth when it was always just their version, shaped by fear, maintained by silence, and never actually about me at all. Colton didn't know I existed. That matters. He wasn't someone who walked away. He was someone who was deliberately kept out, and the distance between those two things is the distance between a wound and an injustice. Learning that didn't erase the 31 years, but it changed what those years meant. They stopped being evidence of my value and started being evidence of someone else's cowardice. What I keep coming back to is Mimi's line about building something they couldn't see. She said it 3 years before she died, sitting in her kitchen over tea, and I didn't fully understand it then. I thought she just meant my consulting practice. Now I think she meant all of it. The habit of continuing anyway, the refusal to stop being curious and capable just because no one in your immediate orbit was keeping track. In Turkey, I've come to believe is mostly what you do when there's no audience. I built 19 clients and a real practice and an industry award nomination in the spaces between the roles my family assigned me, not because I was waiting for a moment to reveal it, but because the work was worth doing regardless of whether anyone ever saw it. That's the thing I want to say clearly to anyone who's been told they're the practical one, the reliable one, the one who handles logistics while someone else gets called talented. The invisibility is not proof. It was never proof. Some of the most significant things that have ever happened in human lives happened without an audience. The value of a thing is not determined by who noticed it. You do not need permission to take up space. You do not need to wait for the right moment, or the right stage, or the right person to finally see you. You build anyway. You keep going anyway. You accumulate the evidence of your own worth in the years when no one is watching, and then one day you walk to a laptop in a room full of people who thought they knew exactly who you were, and you show them what quiet persistence actually looks like. My name is on the door of a real office now. Mimi's sewing box sits on my desk. Colton calls on Sundays. And my mother, slowly, imperfectly, is learning to see me. It's not the ending I would have written at 20. But it's mine. Every part of it is mine.